The reason for the interest being is that you have a business relationship with the applicant and it is a pecuniary interest. That's the declarations of interest, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Madam GM. There's no other further disclosure of interest. We now move through the public forum, and I will now invite the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ewan, to officiate over the public forum. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor has left the room, so we can continue with the public forum. This evening we have 4 speakers to speak in the public forum. The fourth speaker this evening will speak by Zoom, and at that point in time, only myself and our Executive Secretary will be actually able to see the screen of the public speaker, but you'll all be able to hear her voice. The public speakers for this evening, the first is David Dixon. So David, you're able to remove your mask when you speak, and we will be cleaning the speaker between each speaker. David, you have 5 minutes and I'll give you a thumbs up or a nod at 4.5 minutes. And I'd appreciate if you can work on that. Thank you very much. So thank you, David.
Thank you for that. I'm here to speak on the development that was first mentioned regarding the Mayor, the development on Glenroy Road or Forest Reefs Road, the 22-23 subdivision there. I live just opposite where that development will go, and driving up the other day and looking at it, the first thing that struck me is how incongruous a place this patch of land seems for a development. The other thing that strikes me is that it seems that having worked for a council, it seems as it's one of those developments where a lot of the costs are eventually going to be borne by the council and ultimately the ratepayers, because it doesn't appear to be an area that seems to be a natural extension of the village of Millthorpe, where the main, as you know, of Millthorpe, the major service provisions are on the eastern side of the railway. And this is on the western side, which has traditionally been a rural, semi-rural area, small lots like ours. It just seems a very incongruous place for development. Glenroy Road, as you probably know, is basically a country lane. It's basically a lane and a half country lane, 7 or 8 degree slope. The land that this development's going to go in, it appears, I haven't measured it, of course, but seems to be another 7 or 8 degree slope on it. It just doesn't seem a natural place for growth. You would think Millthorpe would be growing the area of the blocks opposite the cemetery there, where this proposed North Millthorpe development was going to go a number of years ago, and perhaps East Millthorpe as well. It just doesn't seem the type of place where you'd be thinking that's a natural area for a 23, 22 seat development subdivision. I understand this was the work of a previous council, but the LEP for Millthorpe was amended. This is largely a rhetorical question in a sense, but if councils are going to develop LEPs and have been involved in the process, it seems defeating the purpose in essence when those LEPs are then amended at the request of developers who say, oh, well, I know it's rated semi-rural subdivision, whatever, but I've decided or I've proposed that I'd like to have it made into major lots. Now, I know that wasn't the work of this council, but I think if you're going to do an LEP, they're only useful if they're applied and there's not all these amendments made to them, as has often happened in the case in Millthorpe. As I said, with all the service divisions, Glenroy Road's going to need upgrade, or the other service divisions for services going to have to be provided. I really think ratepayers, I can only guess that ratepayers are ultimately going to be left carrying the burden for a lot of this development. As some of you may know, our house we lived in what's called the old sports ground at 86 Forest Reefs Road. There's a cricket pitch in the middle. And our house flooded 3 times in December 2010 when a council raising of the road created a sag point that instead of being in line with the drain, which was 100 metres up from our house, the sag point for the road was in front of our front driveway, and our house got flooded 3 times. Now, what we ended up with a giant drain. You may be aware of this, was that it happened 8 or 9 years ago. A giant drain now across our land, which we have to traverse with bridges that council gave us that are absolutely, utterly treacherous whenever they get ice or snow or dew or anything on them at all. They're steel bridges with wooden approaches. And my concern in regards to this development is how much more runoff. We're directly downslope from that. How much more runoff is our house going to receive in the way of roofs, driveways, roads, gutters, curbs, and grassed areas, paved areas on that land? That is all going to end up on our land, and we will be the recipients of all that extra runoff. And we have no idea whether our drains, with the drainage work that was done 8 or 9 years ago, was for the current state of water flow to the area. It did not incorporate a new housing development up the hill that would have maybe 1.5 acres or say 2/3 of a hectare of extra overflow from roofs and things onto the roads. The other thing that strikes me about this is, as you are all aware, this council, or all the councils, all were extended due to COVID an extra 12 months for their mandate because they didn't want to have elections in September last year. And it just strikes me that it just seems like, as I said, it seems when you look at the land, a very incongruous development that doesn't appear to fit in any cultural, societal way with the rest of Millthorpe. It's on the western side of the town. It's where it's where the lands are all small lots, Boothgrove Estate, those kind of things. And this development just seems like an urban development placed in a semi-rural area. What minute were you saying?
1.5 minutes, David.
Yep.
You've got
Yep.
half a
Okay,
minute
I've
or
almost
so.
finished.
Thank you.
For the reasons I'll go back to a few minutes ago, because this council, and I've made the same point with Orange Council on another development which I'm involved, because this council has had a mandate which has been extended 12 months, I just feel that this is such, in the context of a village like Millthorpe, such a controversial development. My feeling is, with council going into lockdown, or not lockdown, going into caretaker mode in a few weeks, I would think it would be judicious for council to hold off and let the new council have another look at this development and make a decision with all the benefits of time and further study into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. Our second speaker this evening in the public forum is David Hansen. Thank you, David. I'll give you a warning of 4.5, David. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Public speaking, not my strong point, so bear with me. So good evening, councillors, council staff, members of the public. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on the issue, which directly affects myself, my family. And also thank you for coming out and seeing it from our point of view a few weeks ago. So we appreciate that. So just as a bit of background, we're a large family. We have 10 children. We've moved to Millthorpe around 9 years ago after living in Blayney for a number of years. We moved around a lot. We're generally, obviously, quite a private family. However, a couple of years ago, our son was diagnosed with Burkitt's lymphoma, and outcomes very good. But however, the town really came to our aid, the village. Couldn't do enough for us to make sure we're okay. I was in Sydney with my son, and Kate, the kids were at home, and that sense of village and sense of community really shone through, and they couldn't do enough for us. So that's the background that brings me here to speak tonight. Yes, there's an impact on our own property and our outlook and our lifestyle. However, there's also an impact on the village, which I feel needs to be raised. So we've digested the report that was sent through mid last week, and we'd just like to emphasise a few key points from our submission. Some of those we raised in the submission that we for the rezoning back in 2016. So these issues we feel are very important, deserve further consideration, or either through amendments to the conditions on the development or rejection of or postponement of approval until these are resolved. So I'd like to reiterate a point made in the submission, the proposed development that, as a previous speaker had alluded to as well, is that we believe it is incongruous with the village. There's a significant separation with Glenroy Road, the dog park, the railway, in the back of all those houses. It's almost like it's a separate suburb. It's Millthorpe South. And to the west and the south of this development is zoned rural. And then to the east is sort of small lot rural. There are some smaller blocks agreed on the right on the road. However, the density and the depth of this development is different to anything else that is that on this side of the on the southern side of the railway. So the visual impact of the development remains a concern. The council's own heritage advisor stated this, and the staff comments in the report effectively waved that away by planting. So there will be some trees to be able to hide a development of this size. So another point which I'd like to raise is the road design. Now, I know road design comes under the state government. However, additional traffic onto this road. So I travel that road between 5:30 and 6:30 every morning, and similar in the evenings. And that the intersection from Forest Reefs Road onto Glenroy Road. So if I could draw a parallel to sort of to Mount Panorama, that's Caltex Chase to Forest Reefs Road is Forest Reefs Road is is the straight, and Caltex Chase is the intersection. So whilst not there's no additional traffic, say the current residents wanted to drive in and out 26 times a day, it's probably no greater traffic load. However, there's an opportunity here and a flag for the council to have a look at that intersection and put some sort of traffic calming device in there, medium strips, that sort of thing, because that corner, they'd be doing 60, 70 Ks through there, and it's dangerous, and there's a fatality waiting to happen. So the impact of additional 21 houses built just to the west of our particular property would have significant impact on our living situation. So we'd stated this in our submission to the rezoning in 2016. So it effectively creates a housing estate on the south, which is like we said, incongruous to the rest of the properties on that side of the road. Whilst we welcome the recommended condition in the report that a timber fence and a hedge be planted, and fully support the inclusion of this, so we feel that alone is not adequate. On the other side, there's a 3-metre nature strip on the western edge to soften the view from the railway station and the horses and the other property to the west. However, we feel on our side that's not enough. It's particularly because of the lay of the land. It's so this development is right in the bottom, so anyone can look straight into it. So
Thank you, David.
Yeah, okay. So my final point is that the power supply to Cheney Vale, and it limits us from creating our own hedge. Now, understanding that that's borrowed, we can't depend on their hedge. So we're requesting the strongest terms that a condition be put in place that during this development, it supplies power underground to 63A, 63B and 63 Forest Reefs Road. So that way we can plant a hedge, and that's a barrier that we own. And that would mitigate the influence of this development.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you, Lauren. Our third speaker this evening in public forum is Bendix Kokomo. Thank you, Bendix.
Pronounce that very well. My name is Bendix Kokomo. to get straight to the point, I live on 63B Forest Ridge Road, adjacent to this proposal. My house is directly opposite the row of 8 smaller blocks in this development. Both our lounge room and dining room look out over this. Once the row and the rows, 2 rows of pine trees are gone, the view will be 8 roofs. The proposed 1.8 meter timber fence will not obscure that view. To see how something like that will actually look, please drive past the latest developments in North Orange. The difference, however, is that those houses do not obstruct the view of longer existing properties because they're just not there. This development is totally different. It will be dropped in and amongst existing, for some houses, long existing homes, rural and semi-rural, with very too little consideration for the interest of people living on those properties. Those people, including myself, bought their property quite a while ago for a reason. And you know what that reason is. At the on-site meeting with council and councillors, I was informed that this development proposal is legal. That may be true, but is it just? If you vote in favor of this proposal, could you at least consider the reduction of 8 roofs as a view to 4? That would, I know, have financial consequences, but, and I'm finalizing my little contribution, the National Australia Bank has currently an advertisement on TV, and it ends like NAB, not just about money. Thank you.
Thank you, Bendix. Our fourth and final speaker this evening in the public forum is Kelly Wood. Hello, Kelly, are you there?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Kelly?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Hello, Kelly, you there now?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Terrific. Yes, we can. Thank you. Kelly, you have 5 minutes in the public forum to speak, and I'll indicate to you when you're at 4.5 minutes, and then to you when you're up to 5. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. And I just wanted to say I've wanted to be there this evening, but I've had to self-isolate because I went to Sydney last week. But I'm obviously here to talk about the proposed subdivision of 23 lots outside of Millthorpe. And I wanted to say that this isn't a personal attack on the developers. There's lots of development that happens around Millthorpe that people don't have a problem with. The problem is with this is the size, really, the size of the blocks. The village of Millthorpe is synonymous with heritage buildings and cobblestone, bluestone streets, beautiful houses and boutiques and specialty shops. The village has its own one-hatted restaurant, as everyone knows, and it's attracted a growing and healthy tourism industry. It's the heritage nature of the village that underpins its attractiveness to visitors. The combination of the heritage buildings, verandas are what's attracted the initial and ongoing investment by individuals in boutique shops and restaurants into Millthorpe. And it's seen the economy of the village grow. Again, I consider that it was these virtues that probably attracted the developers, Mr. and Mrs. Mortimer, to the village in the first place. In the event that the development application is approved, it has the potential to fundamentally undermine the current beauty of this village. It is likely, if not certain, that many, if not all the dwellings to be built on that subdivision will be brick veneer, energy inefficient, with the building footprint taking up most of the relatively small blocks of land. In essence, it will turn this part of the village into a medium density suburban enclave, not dissimilar to the outer suburbs of Australia's large cities. It's also apparent that this subdivision will be seen by visitors travelling to the village by train, and it's entirely out of step with the current heritage built environment of Millthorpe. At this time, it's worthwhile to ask yourself as members of the council or residents of Millthorpe or Blayney, whether you feel that such a large residential development, medium density, is in keeping with the balance of the village. Will the developers even continue to live in the house and where they currently reside in the event it becomes surrounded with new brick veneer homes? I think the answer would be obvious. The proposal is about securing maximum financial windfall for the developers at the expense of the beauty of the village. It reeks of short-termism. Villages like Millthorpe and Carcoar are unique, and that quality needs to be protected and nurtured. They have and will continue to attract, especially in these COVID times, a growing domestic tourism trade, which will continue to add to the diversity and the economy of Blayney Shire Council. In the event of the application is approved, it will fundamentally and irrevocably undermine the beauty and the uniqueness of this village and its attractiveness as a place to visit and stay for tourists and for residents alike. It is akin to selling the goose that laid the golden egg. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Kelly.
Thank you.
Well, councillors, that brings our public forum to an end. So I'll ask that our Mayor Ferguson be returned to the chamber, and I'll vacate his seat.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Okay, now we move through to item 2, minutes of the previous council meeting held 31st of May. So recommendation there, councillors, do I have a mover for this recommendation? Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Councillor Newstead has seconded that. I'll put that motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, any matters arising from those minutes? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick update. If the General Manager, we were applying for some funding, Stronger Country Communities. Has Council progressed to actually put an application in for that funding?
Councillor Reynolds, Madam GM.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, yes, the applications were submitted by the due date, which was last Friday, the 25th of June.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. No other questions or comments regards to the minutes of the previous meeting. I now move through to item 3, page 10, which is a notice of motion, councillors, in regards to our remote attendance guidelines. There's a motion there. We have a mover. Councillor Somerville would like to move this motion. We have a seconder. Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be brief. I foreshadowed at the last council meeting that whilst we adopted remote attendance guidelines at a previous meeting, what had become apparent was that they were pretty unworkable. We adopted them thinking that we didn't have any flexibility, but on investigation, In fact, we do have flexibility. The main issue was the need to give 6 business days notice of your need to attend remotely and to specify reasons like illness or natural disasters, which are not something you can normally predict on 6 days' notice. So I had a look at it. I've proposed a motion that we adopt a new set of guidelines, which have been circulated with the business paper, and I commend those to councillors.
Thank you, Councillor Somervale. Councillor Reynolds, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and fully endorse what Councillor Somervale had said. We've tried to make it as flexible and particularly last minute situations that may occur to enable as many councillors as possible to attend the council meeting. So I commend Councillor Somervale for coming up with a shortened version, but still gives that flexibility to enable councillors up until the middle of the day, at least of the day of the council meeting, rather than that 6 days out flexibility to attend. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. And I'd certainly like to agree. It's an excellent motion. Councillor Somervale, I look forward to taking it to the Local Government New South Wales Conference. So we can endorse it for next year. Okay, councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Please note item 4, page 14 is going to be moved to item 6. So we'll move through that. I'll draw your attention next to item 5, page 17, which is 2021 Sculptures by the Bush report. Council receive and note this report. Councillors, do I have a mover for this report? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way and Councillor Ewan has seconded that. Councillors, any questions or comments in regards to Sculptures by the Bush report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Fully support Sculptures by the Bush. It did have some challenges in getting enough participation, but some fantastic entries. And I think the winning entry, or one of the winning entries, was from Joseph's School with the school bus. But there were some other fantastic entries across the area, and encourage people to come and have a look at our Shire. So hopefully we can potentially grow this next financial year and potentially have another one. So commend Megan for all the work that she's done in getting this project over the line and getting tourism coming to Blayney Shire.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. It certainly did attract a lot of media at the time as well, which was great considering the year that we had. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to item 6, page 18, minutes of the Blayney Shire Tourism, Towns and Village Committee meeting held on the 25th of May. Recommendation there, receive these minutes. Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Ewan, thank you. A second that. Questions, comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some good news for our community, where we finally got a date to provide access to junction reefs. So it's a note here on the bottom of the business paper. So stay tuned, only a couple of weeks away, and we will enable public access after around 30 years of closure for the Junction Reefs Reserve. That we do have an agreement with Oceana Gold to open up Junction Reefs. So fantastic potential tourist opportunity. Of course, the oldest hydroelectric dam in Australia is at Junction Reefs on the Ballabula River, and it's right here in Blayney Shire. And there was one other matter, Mr. Mayor. Oh, yes. With regard to tourism, some concerns about the Visitor Information Centre and the future of the Visitor Information Centre. Again, challenges in getting volunteers. So if anyone is interested in volunteering with regard to the Visitor Information Centre, they'd love to hear from you in the community, even if it is only for a couple of hours a week or every second week. But we are lacking a lot of volunteers at the Tourist Information Centre in Blayney, and it may be something that the new council, when elected later this year, has to look at as well. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other questions or comments, councillors? Also must make note that Carkle was named the second in the top tourism awards, which is a wonderful achievement from that wonderful little tourism town. Okay, councillors, no other questions or comments. I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, will now hand over the meeting to my Deputy Mayor, Councillor Ewan, and he will conduct item 6, being the Biz HQ, and the following item 4, which I've declared an interest in.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to make it noted that Mr. Mayor has left the chamber. Item 6, fellow councillors, which appears in your paper as item 4, is the item to be discussed now. There's a recommendation there, fellow councillors. Would someone like to move that way? Thank you. And can I get a move in a second? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Anyone wish to speak to or against this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yeah, fully support the move to change Business HQ. It used to be known as the Business Enterprise Centre, the Cabon Orange Blayney Business Enterprise Centre. So this council was one of 3 foundation councils with this organisation. It has come a long way since then. It now covers more than 20 councils, areas across New South Wales. And so with the evolution of time, they're looking at moving from an incorporated association to a public company limited by guarantee. They've developed what they call a draft constitution, and that constitution will become, if we recommend and the General Manager signs off on it, that they change to a public company limited by guarantee. The important thing to note is that because the organisation is evolved, it has grown, it has a number of staff, a large number of staff now that are involved with it, that it's important that it does change across to this public company. So I fully endorse and support the recommendation put up to council.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. And our fellow councillor, thank you, Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Yes, I support this as well. An incorporated association is not the right sort of structure for a body like this, and a company limited by guarantee is far more appropriate, which obviously the Tax Office and the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission have also recognised and have recommended this change. So it's a very sensible change. I think we're approving a draft constitution tonight, which we're led to believe is just a draft, and that there'll be opportunities to amend that after careful reflection as to what's appropriate in the constitution. But we need a constitution to get the incorporation as a company limited by guarantee. So it's the first stage. It may not be perfect, but we'll have an opportunity of tailoring the constitution at the time of the annual meeting, I think towards the end of October this year.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. Any other fellow councillors with questions or comments? This is a wonderful thing that's happening with Business HQ, and it's a wonderful project or a wonderful thing for Blayney and Cabon and Orange Council to be in as a joint venture. So we're very pleased to be part of this Business HQ. So fellows, if there's no other questions or comments, I'll put the recommendation. All those in favour?
Aye.
Those against? Thank you. Carried. Now, fellow councillors, moving on to item 7 in your paper this evening. Councillors, item 7 on the paper this evening is DA 60/2020, 23 lot subdivision, 61 Forest Reach Road, Millthorpe. Fellow councillors, a recommendation there do I have someone that'd like to move that way? Thank you.
Move that, but I'd like to move an amendment for item 2. Oh, sorry. I'd like to see an amendment to number 2 on that recommendation.
I think I require a seconder before I take that amendment. Is that correct?
Mr Deputy Mayor, Councillor Newstead, can you please say what your amendment is?
Yeah, in regards to number 2, where we refuse to endorse the name of the proposed street as Mortimer Drive, I'd like to say that we don't do that, that we give the developer, if the development is approved, the chance to bring that name forward along with other names, and that it's done through the council's policy or street policy naming thing, and meets the criteria of that policy.
Do you have some wording, please, Mr. Councillor Newstead?
So that an amended road naming application is submitted for consideration in accordance with the council's road, street and bridge names.
Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Fellow councillors, that amendment there, do I have a seconder for? Thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor, there's
Thank
actually
you.
policy needs to be at the end of that. Number 2. It's actually policy.
Need a seconder, and then Councillor Reynolds is that seconder. Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any council has wish to speak for or against that amendment? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Are we speaking for the amendment or are we speaking on the recommendations?
No, we're speaking on the amendment. Should the recommendation go through, then we'll speak on the total recommendation.
I support Councillor Newstead's number 2, which is to change the wording and enable the applicant to put in at a later stage a potential naming under the council policy. So the council has an extensive policy on naming of roads, bridges and other infrastructure. And so, yeah, I support this amendment to the number 2. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Fellow councillors, any other questions or comments in regard to the amendment? Should there not be, I put, my apologies, Councillor Kingham.
I'd just like to say, Mr. Chairman, that the application is within the Millthorpe limits. I think it's often construed that Millthorpe ends at the railway line, but having ridden a bicycle on that road from goodness only knows what year, a long time ago, there was always people and cars and activities on the western side of the railway line. And so I think the consideration that it's not part of Millthorpe is not correct. Millthorpe has always gone out to the very last house, and that's where the road speed limits are. And the other consideration is drainage.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Sampa. Yes, point of order taken.
I think we're debating whether we should adopt the amendment as proposed by Councillor Newstead, seconded by Councillor Reynolds, rather than talking to the recommendation itself. And I think Councillor Kingham's talking to the recommendation.
Thank you very much, Councillor Somerville. You are correct. Councillor Kingham, we're speaking only on the amendment, which is in regard to the naming of the potential new road into the subdivision, which is...
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to challenge that. The recommendation that we're speaking to is on the board. That's what I'm speaking to. That's the amendment, and I'm speaking to points 1 and 2.
I asked Councillor Kingham, I asked for someone to move the recommendation. Councillor Newstead moved the recommendation with an amendment. The amendment which appears on the board as part 2 of the total recommendation, which is what we're actually speaking about at the moment. So once I either get that amendment either passed or defeated, then we can actually speak on the total recommendation. So at the moment, we're speaking on the amendment. Should the amendment become part of the recommendation, then I will call for a second for the full recommendation, and then we can speak on that. So I'm asked if you wish to speak in regard to the amendment, that's fine. If you don't wish to speak in regard to the amendment, then I shall put the amendment, and the amendment will become part of the recommendation. Then I will ask for a seconder for the recommendation, and then we can discuss the recommendation with, should the amendment become part of that, which is actually changing it from originally, there was part 2 of the recommendation reads that council refused to endorse the name of the proposed street as Mortimer Drive. The recommendation from Councillor Newstead has now come that an amendment road naming application is submitted for consideration in accordance with council's road, street and bridge names policy. So we're speaking for or against part 2 of the recommendation. Should that be approved or should that pass, then that becomes part of the total recommendation, which then I shall ask for a seconder, and then we can discuss the total recommendation. So is there any other councillors who wish to speak for or against the amendment? Thank you, Councillor Somerville.
For the record, Mr. Deputy Mayor, I'm happy with the amendment.
Thank you. There's no other questions or comments then in regard to the amendment. I shall put the amendment as it reads on the board above you, on the screen above you. So all those in favour of the amendment, which is part 2 of the recommendation?
Aye.
Those against? Thank you. So that's carried. So that now becomes part of the motion. So fellow councillors, Councillor Newstead originally moved the recommendation, but I now need a seconder for the total recommendation, which is part 1 and 2. So can I have a seconder for that recommendation?
Deputy Mayor, I'll second it for debate.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Right, councillors, the recommendation which appears in front of you on the screen, not as written in your paper. Part 1 remains the same. Part 2 is now the adopted amendment. We're speaking on that recommendation that appears before you. So, fellow councillors, I ask for questions or comments. Thank you, Councillor.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I totally disagree with your conduct of the resolution. I don't believe it was satisfactory, despite Councillor Somerville's agreement. When you move an amendment, part 2 has to be part 1 as well. And so I just disagree. Anyhow, I'll carry on. Now, going back to the beginning, there was a suggestion that the western part of Millthorpe is not part of Millthorpe, and I disagree with that. As I said, I rode a bicycle for a long time ago to the school, and it was always part of Millthorpe. In fact, the mayor, or was Shire president at the time of the Blayney Shire, Lyndhurst at the time, which subsequently became Blayney, lived in that western part of Millthorpe. And to suggest that he wasn't living in Millthorpe is just not correct. So the issue that I have with the development is the drainage. I would have much preferred, and I said this to the owners, that the number of houses is very excessive. It was only when the staff had said that the planning proposal was legally agreeable that changed my mind. So I couldn't actually pick on a piece of the resolution that I disagreed with, but my preference would be that there were less houses and that the beautiful driveway was retained. And I'm rather hoping that at some future point that the application might be adjusted to reflect that. However, given the fact that the council staff have worked at this over a long period of time and very thoroughly, and have convinced me that it's legally liable, I'm bound to vote in favour of it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Kingham. Just a comment, Councillor Kingham, sorry, get used to these masks. Just a comment, Councillor Kingham, in regard to, yes, I agree with you there that the western or southern side of the railway line of Millthorpe is very much part of Millthorpe and will remain so. And as we're all very well aware, it falls within the heritage conservation area of Millthorpe. So it also holds those regulation and guidelines in regard to the development, which is very much in favour for council to have some regulation on the proposal. And also our current DCP plan overshadows this potential subdivision. So I think we have some safeguards in that regard also. Councillor Reynolds, you wish to speak? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. May I start by congratulating our staff as an extensive report. The staff have done a fantastic job in compiling it and developing this report. I am also wishing to state that I'm not anti-development within our Shire, but I do have concerns that we as a council don't leave a legacy issue, and also we have a sustainable development for our children. So I have a number of issues with this proposed development. Most of my concerns centre around water and drainage, as Councillor Kingham did mention drainage there a short time ago. The last thing I want is another Unwin or Stabbock Street in Millthorpe. That's going to cost our council over $1 million to rectify. I don't want that again. So the first sort of area is the water course that comes from the, I suppose you'd call it the southeast of the block. So up on the hill, there are 2 dams up there. Water comes down through the block. On what's being proposed at the moment, the water course vanishes halfway through block 24. So I do have some concerns on what's been put up there. I know there are conditions that an engineer's report has to be developed, but it really does concern me where a watercourse just vanishes in the middle of a subdivision. There are also, so that's mentioned in condition 43. However, I am concerned that maybe condition 42B might actually contradict condition 43 in that it says that you can't do any work to try and change the drainage or the land structure. So there's the potential there, though it comes down to interpretation. I've also examined the topographic map provided by the New South Wales government. So I've gone and done some research to actually analyse this block. That topographic map indicates that the water flows through lots 13, 14 and 22 of this proposed development. That's on the eastern side, so with the eastern neighbour. And then that flows towards, so it comes down the hill, flows through those blocks to block 22 and then to Glenroy Road. And under condition 42B states any clearing or drainage activities shall not alter the drainage pattern of the site. So I'm concerned again about water moving down through the backyards of those blocks, which while different to Unwin and Stabbock could be a lot similar. The proponents also indicated only draining at lot 17. Now, again, that can be modified and with the council staff, again, the directors through the council, as in the engineer's report, the final engineer's report, to check that that drainage is sufficient. But it does concern me that that what's been put in really ignores the water laying of a lot of that land. A lot of that land is very flat. We heard from someone earlier, from Mr. Dixon, with regard to a 7% slope, but down the bottom of that block, you're looking at a very, very shallow slope, if not pretty well non-existent slope. It might be a 1 degree or 2 degrees. So water currently lays there. I've seen it in the middle of winter. So I am concerned about waterlogging on blocks 12, 13, 14 and 22. I've also, with regard to drainage and water movement from the neighbour on the eastern side, I have some concerns about that water movement and drainage there, and whether how much of it actually comes across into the potential backyards of those blocks, given condition 42B, that they can't change the structure of the land. I've also got some concerns on the other side, also the western side, with regards to lots 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 and 9. Now, there is a proposed stormwater drain there at the moment, and as Councillor Kingham highlighted, there is currently a driveway through that comes down there, but it's also heavily planted with trees. At the moment, pine trees, but they are a pump. They are a huge pump to drain that soil. Now, the proposal is from the developer to demolish all of those trees, to clear those trees, maybe plant some more trees, as in some smaller or far less trees. And that area, from my observations, it appears to be very, very wet. And particularly if those trees aren't there, I know pine trees act as a huge pump to suck water out. As in, so I've got concerns about the water table there. The next concern or issue I have, as we heard from Mr. Dixon tonight, is with regard to the runoff from that subdivision and its impact on downstream neighbours. So at the moment, the water is proposed to go out onto Glenroy Road and Forest Reef Road, go underneath Forest Reef Road, and then down into those neighbours around the other side. Now, there is a water retention basin that is proposed under this development, but I still have concerns with so many rooftops, so much concrete, so much bitumen, that in a heavy rainfall event, that there will be a large amount of water leaving that site, also coming down Glenroy Road, and whether that will have an impact on neighbours downstream of this proposed development. And as Mr. Dixon said, he did encounter flooding, but that was for a different reason in 2010, but whether his block may suffer further flooding if this development is approved. With regard to vegetation management along the eastern side, which is one of the conditions of consent, I have concerns about the management of that vegetation. Now, it's my understanding the proponent is suggesting that each individual landholder look after their own trees or vegetation, that maybe the proponent plants the trees, but someone else looks after them. I've got real concerns about noxious weeds, or priority weeds as they're now called, also feral pests, so rabbits and other things. But the ownership of that, once that those plants are planted, as in who will actually look after them? Now, technically, it's the owners of each of those blocks on the eastern side. There's also some discussion within the response from the proponent that they may also consider some vegetation management on the western side as well. So I've got real concerns about who looks after it, who actually establishes it and maintains it. And some residents will look after it, you know, without any hesitation. Others won't, and that's a real concern there, that we're creating another problem for council. Finally, I'd also like to look at street lighting. While I know it's in the development control plans that we stick it into the electrical network, I'd rather see what we've done just around the corner with the underpass and put in solar panels, put in solar lights in that subdivision. to have a future for our children so that we can move towards being carbon neutral as a council, given that we have to look after the payment of the street lights. So it's really our carbon responsibility. So while I understand it's within the rules to go ahead, I would have loved to have seen the proponent actually look at some form of solar lighting similar to what's just around the corner with the underpass. So finally, again, I'd just like to thank the staff. I really appreciate the time and effort that the staff have put to this analysis of this proposal to develop this subdivision. But I will not be supporting the subdivision when it comes to a vote in the chamber. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Reynolds. What else thank you, Councillor Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. I'll start where Councillor Reynolds started and finished, and congratulate the staff. They have done a wonderful job. It's not easy. They've produced an extraordinarily comprehensive report, 74 pages. They've been through at least as many pages of submissions, and they've negotiated with the developer to achieve some improvements on the overall scheme of this subdivision. I congratulate them, particularly the director and the manager planning. They've done a great job. I find this a very difficult decision. Very difficult decision. It's almost a sort of a seminal point in the development of Millthorpe, the debate on whether this should be approved or not. Because there's two competing aspects here. One is the need to provide more blocks for residential development around Millthorpe, and I take that as a given and I fully support that. This is zoned residential, it's available for residential development, and we need more residences. There's a demand for them in Millthorpe and we need to meet that demand. But on the other hand, we need to balance that with the need to protect the unique historical setting of Millthorpe and the well-preserved historical features and the existing settlement pattern in and around the village of Millthorpe. That's really important. That's as one of the speakers said tonight. That's one of the attractions of Millthorpe, and we can't destroy that. So we've got to balance those two issues, and it's very, very difficult. So the layout of this subdivision needs to reconcile those two competing issues. And as councillors, we're the consent authority now. It's the staff have done a fantastic report. They put some recommendations to the councillors, but we councillors are the ones who've got to decide this. So we need to see what guidance we get from the various planning instruments, our LEP and our development control plan, because they're the things that guide our decision making here. The report is so comprehensive that it's almost a challenge to councillors to get to the key issues or the core of what's really important and what should help us decide one way or the other. And I've reflected on this quite a bit in the last week or so. And I think the critical thing to me are the two important interfaces, the eastern interface and the western interface. They're where this new development butts up against existing land uses or existing characteristics of the village. I'll start with the western side. This is where there's the interface with the existing pattern of residential development in South Millthorpe. And I agree with Councillor Kingham, this is certainly a part of Millthorpe. This is just as much a part of Millthorpe as any other area of the village. What I've looked at there, and thanks to the staff for drawing this to our attention, are the relevant provisions of our LEP and our development control plan. The LEP, clause 4.1, I've just made a note here, relates to lot sizes in subdivisions and aims to ensure that development is undertaking on appropriate sized parcels of land. That's picked up in the development control plan, which aims to ensure that new subdivisions adjacent to existing urban areas complements the existing subdivision pattern and character of the existing urban area. So we've got the western interface, which is now that this land's been rezoned RU5 village, it's exactly the same zoning as the existing houses to the west. So we need to make sure that the subdivision pattern is preserved. And then just moving to the eastern side of the development, this is probably in a sense more critical because this is a zone boundary, as well as it's the buffer between rural and residential. It raises issues of the right to farm, but it's also the issue which has most impact on the sort of historical, the fact that this is in a heritage conservation area and the views of this subdivision from the village. This is where the rubber hits the road on that western interface with the development. So the two issues I've looked at, the eastern interface and the western interface. There is one other issue which I do want to raise because I regard this as pretty important. And that's what I would call the southern or the southeastern part of this development, which is in fact blocks 11, 12 and 13. I happened to be on the council when this planning proposal was supported by the council to rezone this land as residential. Now, you can debate whether that was a good decision or a bad decision. The fact is the decision was made. It is residential and it's entitled to be developed as a residential subdivision. But just going back and reminding councillors at the time, the planning proposal was to rezone the entire block for residential purposes. At the time, only half the block was in the future investigation village zone, the northern part of the block. The southern half of the block wasn't in the future residential investigation zone. It was part of a future rural residential potential area. Council was induced at the time to support the rezoning of the whole block for residential purposes based on a concept plan, and which we've spoken about before. The concept plan is just that. I accept it's a concept plan. But what was said in relation to the southern part of the development was that was going to be a transition from potential future rural residential to this new highly intensive residential development. The concept plan, which came with the planning proposal, had only 2 lots being created in this southern portion. What is now the proposed lot 24, the very large lot, and one other lot. The report which came with the planning proposal said that in effect, only 2 new dwellings would eventuate, and these would be of a similar or lower contour than existing dwellings on the neighbouring properties. They were to be large. The smallest was 2,800 square metres and would be a gradual transition to the smaller village lots. This was picked up in the report that went to council at the time, and I've gone back and had a look at that. And the report to council said that only 2 additional allotments would be located in this area. In the DA that's now before us, there are in fact 3 lots fronting the southern end of the cul-de-sac. One's only 860 square metres. So there's 3 lots, not just one. The staff comment on page 65 of the report said that this was only a concept plan and the developer's not bound by it. Now, I agree with that. That's clearly, as a matter of principle, that's right, it was a concept plan. But I think there's another matter of principle here as well. I mean, as I see it, when a developer asks for council support for a rezoning to include previously non-residential earmarked land to be included, and if it's supported, effectively commits to that part of the property only having a modest yield, which is what the report said, then in that respect, it becomes a bit more than a mere non-committal concept, at least the way I see it. So weighing all that up, I've come to the same sort of conclusion that Councillor Reynolds seems to have come to. On the western side, on the western boundary, which is lots 2 to 9, I think the proposed density there is too great, having regard to the adjoining pattern of development with the rest of South Millthorpe. The adjoining blocks, 63A, 65 and so on, in that area of Forest Reach Road, are all around, there's a minimum 1,200 square metres. The adjoining blocks in the same zone, immediately to the east of those blocks, will be only 585 square metres, about half of what the existing pattern of development is. I know this is all just a question of judgment, but I don't agree with the conclusion in the report on page 45 that the proposed subdivision won't detract from the existing subdivision pattern and character of the surrounding area. And I don't think that comparing these small lots, the 585 square metre lots, with lot sizes in the village itself is a useful or a meaningful comparison, because after all, they're separated by the railway and they were developed in a totally different era to the one we're in now. And on the eastern interface, I think what the staff have achieved in the treatment of lots 13, 14 and 22 with the 3 metre buffer and the hardwood fence, I think that achieves everything that we need to achieve on the western interface. I'm happy with that. But as I said earlier, for the reasons I outlined, I'm not happy that what was promised to be just one lot in what wasn't earmarked for residential is now 3 lots. I think that should be just 1 lot. And so at the end of the day, we're not here to negotiate any changes to this. It's put before us as a proposal which we either accept or we reject. And for the reasons I've just outlined, I don't intend to vote in favour of this.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Fellow councillors, Councillor Newstead, thank you.
Well, I concur with David Somerville or Councillor Somerville in that the report was excellent by the staff, and not being a town planning expert, I must admit I was a bit overwhelmed by it. But my question to the director, is there anything within our current LEP and DCP that says we should reject this development? If not, and we do reject it, my fear is that the developer may take it to the Land and Environment Court, and we would probably, well, I don't know because I'm not an expert, but I would feel that we would probably lose going on the fact that I can't see anything that goes against our LEP and our DCP. So if, through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, to the director, is there anything in there, Director, that says, no, this shouldn't go ahead?
Mr. Deputy Mayor, Councillor Newstead, no. So where the professional planning staff landed was as per our recommendation. We worked through all applicable legislation. And that also includes when you start to bring in recent settlement strategy work, local strategic planning statement work. The recommendation that we got to as professionals was to recommend approval. So no, I don't believe there is anything to warrant refusal in this instance.
Just further that too, like I do understand where the neighbours are coming from. Yeah, it's a tough one, but as councillors, we're put in a position where we've got to make tough decisions sometimes. So when the vote comes around, I'll say what I want to say, then I'll vote the way I need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Newstead. Councillor King, have you got any further comments? Or thank you. Yeah, fellow councillors, this is has been not contentious by any means, but it's certainly created a lot of interest from the wider community, which we're very thankful for, not only drawing attention with their submissions to council of their questions and comments that they've made in regard to the proposal, And we thank them for that because that process, I believe, helps make the overall outcome a much better one. And likewise, the applicant has worked very much so with council over many months to bring us to this point in time. Earlier, Councillor Reynolds spoke of his concerns with the stormwater, and rightly so. I do believe that after speaking with our Director of Environmental Services and understanding how the Lot 1, the retention basin, will work, and once fully engineered with the stormwater, I believe that will work, and issues with stormwater won't be, to my understanding, be present. The area falling in the heritage conservation area, as Councillor News has said, with our LEP and our DCP plan, I believe certainly will have a lot of controlling factors on the development. It concerns me, though, that I have two fellow councillors, and I have an absent councillor this evening that hasn't been able to contribute this evening in this decision. I have two fellow councillors that have openly suggested that they wouldn't be supporting this development. That tends to make me think that we can do this better, which is a concern, because I know the applicant has spent many months and a lot of work with our staff to make this permissible, and it is a permissible development, and can be approved on what sits here in front of us this evening. So I guess, fellow councillors, if there's no other questions or discussion on the matter, and I need to call for a division for the recommendation. So, fellow councillors, I will call for all those in favour of the recommendation. Thank you. Those against? Thank you. Fellows, the reason that I'm... Councillor, give me the... Please.
Mr Deputy Mayor, can you please call the division again and do it slowly so that our minute taker can take it?
Thank you, Madam GM. Fellows, I need to call for a division for voting on this on this recommendation. So those in favour of the recommendation, thank you. Those against the recommendation? Your Honor, before we call the Mayor back into the chamber, fellows, I will give an explanation as to the reason why I'm voting against the recommendation, and that is because I have two fellow councillors that are voting against it and two for. I don't have a complete seating of all councillors, and that sends out warning bells to me that this needs to be 100% right, and I would prefer to have a unanimous decision made on the recommendation. I know it puts us in a position where the applicant and our director need to work together again. Thank you.
So through Mr. Mayor, with that refusal, we actually need some reasons for articulation as to why, whilst they won't become binding as part of the recommendation, we need some points as to why it was refused. So they need to be articulated specifically.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Mayor. As I stated in my presentation or report to Council, water management is the number one concern I've got. The proponent, I don't feel, put up an adequate justification on how they were going to manage water across the site. I don't want another situation. A previous council made the decisions with regard to Unwin and Stabbock, different situation, but there in the application that the proponents put in, a water course that is shown on topographic maps vanishes in the middle of their subdivision, which means that we potentially will have major drainage issues, flooding issues, etc., on what has been put up and what has been proposed at the moment. Now, again, that potentially could be subject to modification, but as in, and what I hope, if the proponent does come back, that maybe there are some amendments or modifications. So that's one of the concerns, is waterlogging, as in with the removal of the trees on the western boundary. Again, they're giant pumps at the moment, that those backyards from lots number 2 through to 9 will become very, very wet, even with drainage. As in, maybe if the proponent again came back with some agri drains, ag pipe, etc., as in that might come up with some solutions. But at the moment, on what is being proposed, I just cannot subject potential residents to a subdivision that will potentially be very, very wet. I've walked across neighbouring blocks in the middle of winter and seen how wet that ground can come and get over time. So water is one of the big issues. Vegetation management is another issue. I have a real problem in planting trees along boundaries, and particularly as proposed along the eastern boundary, but also the western boundary with the neighbours that are close by. And the proponent, to take my hat off, has suggested that maybe as an option to pull out these trees and put some other hedge along there. But who looks after them? I've got real concerns for weed management. I've got concerns for noxious animal management, and also just the maintenance of them. Fire risk, again, because it's the other side of the fence. It's going to be a high paling fence that's proposed, as in who looks after that 3 metre area. As in, it's going to create problems for council for many years to come. So I have a real issue there with the management and looking after that vegetation. As I also mentioned, and again, it's not within our conditions, but I would have thought the proponent could have been proactive when it came to street lighting and maybe suggested that we go down the solar path towards carbon neutrality, which is what this council and many other councils appear to be heading, and rather than having connected to the essential energy network, that I'd rather see some form of green subdivision, innovative subdivision. And the final reason is the density of the development, that it's just too dense, particularly on that western side. So again, lots 2 through to 9, I find that are just way too dense as compared to the character of the rest of Forest Reef Road, which is a lot larger scale. And it's just with the density, and yes, as stated, it may be permissible under the LEP, but in the character of the village, and it is a village, and I get many comments about the current character and the heritage value. And so I'm torn, and I've already made it my vote, but as in just on how dense this housing is compared to neighbouring or surrounding housing. So they're the reasons that I voted against this potential development.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Any other councillors wish to make a comment? Thank you, Councillor Somerville.
Yes, if it's necessary to restate the reasons I voted against the recommendation, I'm happy to do so as succinctly as I can. I spoke far too long before. 2 reasons. First one, that the proposed density on the western boundary, that's lots 2 to 9, is too great, having regard to the pattern of development on the existing adjoining urban area. And secondly, that there should only be 3 new lots, not 5, on the land that was not included in the original future investigation area, as that was the basis on which the rezoning was supported.
You Councillor Somerville. Those reasons will be noted, fellows, and I'm asking our director to go back and speak with the applicant and see if we can make this better, I guess, in a simple form. As I said, I believe the subdivision is permissible and we need to grow Millthorpe. And yes, we need to be very sensitive about how we do grow Millthorpe. It'll be only selfish of ourselves and Millthorpians themselves in thinking that we stagnate Millthorpe and not grow it. We don't, I understand, wish to grow it so that it becomes what it's not today, because the reason why people live in Millthorpe is because of the character and the community it has. And it's a fine balance, I guess, to manage that and grow Millthorpe. And I believe that this development certainly can do that with some more work around the areas which Councillor Reynolds and Councillor Somerville have suggested. And I would appreciate if we can have the director and the applicant work together and that we can bring this back to our council meeting in July and hopefully then have a full approval. And at that point in time, hopefully I'll have a full seating council to vote on the subdivision.
Through you, Mr. Deputy Mayor, there will not be a report come back to the July council meeting. This is a refusal. There will have to be a new application or a modification. We might finish that section.
Thank you very much, Madam GM. I'll ask the director again anyway to work with the applicant so that we can make a subdivision as proposed possible over the next period of time. Thank you very much. We have the Mayor return to the chamber, please. Thanks, Lauren.
Okay, thank you. So used to it. Okay, thank you, councillors. Now, draw your attention to page 95, item 8, report of council investments as at 31st of May. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Reynolds has moved that way. Councillor Newstead, I believe, second. Any questions or comments regards to this report? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 9, page 100, the adoption of the 21-22 delivery program and operational plan. Please note there's 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 points here on this recommendation. Have a mover for this recommendation. Councillor Reynolds, and has moved it. Councillor Somerville, I believe, to second that. Councillors, any questions and comments in regards to our operational plan for next year? Pretty good plan, I think. Some good projects in it. If not, yes, Councillor Ewan.
Just briefly, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'd just like to say I think this is a wonderful operational plan. I think we're going to achieve very much over the next 12-month period. The staff have done a wonderful job in that regard. I think our rating structure is very much had a lot of work over the past years with it and works very well for a Shire of Blayney. So I just think generally we've done a great job, and with the minimal amount of feedback that we've had in regard to our operational plan suggests that maybe we've got it somewhere near right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Endorse what Councillor Ewan has said. Some major capital works programs, again, finishing off Carcour Street in Blayney, Carbine Road, which has been a long running road works that has been promised and taken away and promised and taken away. Well, next financial year, this council will give Carbine Road the bitumening that it so deserves, because it's a very dusty road and some of the residents really suffer from along there. Other major works include Centrepoint, the roof, a huge project that going to complete our Centrepoint facility, which is a fantastic facility, and in having a new roof across the whole complex except for the Scout Hall is a major achievement. But also, again, moving towards carbon neutrality with the solar panels as part of that, and also water, etc. So it's exciting times ahead for whoever is on the new council come September. But this is it enables growth of our council and our local government area and facilities within our local government area. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to operational plan? Councillor Somerville.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Just one thing probably worth commenting on is the Senior Rugby League request to reduce the fee for the use of the ground of King George Oval based on the number of teams being less than what they thought they might have had. I think we need to stick to the fee in the exhibited plan. The fee, there's a sort of a misunderstanding, I think, here. The fee for the ground is a fee for preparation of the ground to make it available for use. It's not a fee per team. So I think our charge there should remain.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to this item, our operational plan? I guess just to make note that we are taking the IPART maximum increase the rate of 2% recommended, and happy to say that the red and yellow bins, there'll be no increase next year for that service, which is, I think, is a good result, and a small fee of our waste management levy of $6 increase. So, councillors, no other questions or comments. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, item 10, page 108, 2021 councillor and mayoral remuneration. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Thank you. Councillor Somerville has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Any questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question possibly to the General Manager. I understand that there has been a decision on superannuation for councillors. While it's probably too late for this council, but wondering if any recommendation may come up to this council for the next council to potentially look at superannuation.
Yeah. I believe it's next financial year.
So through you, Mr. Mayor, it will be decision of council. I was expecting that it would be the new council make that decision when the new council is elected, when we're preparing our next operational plan and delivery program.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments? Councillor Somerville.
I think the proposed superannuation for council is a decision for the next council, and I don't think it comes in until the next financial year anyway. So there's time to consider that. What is unknown, of course, is whether a council who pays superannuation to its councillors will have that deducted from the council fee, the basic councillor fee. I think that's sort of a bit up in the air. And the other thing interesting to note that the Remuneration Tribunal didn't take into account that councillor fees were frozen last year. There was no catch up for the frozen fee. That as it may, I support the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Somerville. No questions, other questions or comments? I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 11, page 110, the adoption of the complaints management policy. Councillors, recommendation there that would be adopted. Have a mover. Thank you, Councillor Somerville has moved that way. Councillor Reynolds, I think, got in first. Second it. Councillors, any questions or comments? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Item 12, page 111. Excuse me. Adoption of a pathway hierarchy standard and maintenance policy. Recommendation there, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Ewan has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead. Councillors, any questions or comments regards to this maintenance policy? Very good. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Page 112, item 13, the minutes of the Blayney Shire Audit, Risk and Improvement Committee held 2nd of June 21. Recommendation there to be received. Thank you, Councillor Somerville has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Reynolds has seconded that. Councillors, questions or comments in regards to this? Councillor Reynolds, you have a question? Comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's with regard to the schedule of outstanding audit recommendations, which I don't think there's a schedule attached. So maybe through to Councillor Somerville, are there many outstanding recommendations, and maybe whether councillors could actually see what is still outstanding?
Maybe the director.
Are you happy to take that?
Well,
to the director?
Defer to the director, who's probably more on top of what's in the detail of the schedule of outstanding audit recommendations. But I'm sure there's no problem in councillors getting to see what they are, but I'll defer to the director.
Thank you, Mr. Director.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we'll make the Audit Risk and Improvement Committee agenda available on the councillor portal. I apologise there, Councillor Reynolds. The scheduled recommendations, the number of items are relatively minor considering the number of audits. I think the oldest, what is of concern, I suppose, to councillors would be the age of the oldest recommendations, and they relate back to the review of the Glenroy Road project, which we're developing a project management system, and that's close to being completed. Insofar as number, I'd have to take that on notice.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. No other questions or comments in regards to this report? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Page 115, item 14, Director of Infrastructure Services Monthly Report. Recommendation that the report be received and noted. Councillors, do I have a mover for this report? Councillor Somerville, I believe, has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Newstead, second that. Questions or comments, councillors, in regards to the Director's report? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. a couple of questions. Firstly, or comments, I suppose. The Blayney to Drumongal railway line gets a mention in here that I think a study has been proposed or is in actual train, that a company has been engaged, I think, to do that. So, which is fantastic news, to actually see whether there's a business justification case for it, but also the cost of it, as in how much it's going to cost. With regard to the study on Millthorpe, so the survey, which I believe there's well over 200 respondents, and so some information is already starting to come out within this report about sort of what residents and community around Millthorpe are asking and looking, etc. So accessibility, etc. So fantastic that the community participated with, I'm not quite sure, and maybe a question to the director, was it around about 220 or 270 people that participated, but a huge number anyway.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, in accordance with the report, it was 277 responses.
Which is fantastic, Mr. Mayor. So again, congratulations to the staff for engaging a company that seems to have engaged with our community very well. Blayney Library, again, moving towards completion of that project. New automatic sliding doors, which the Accessibility Committee has been highlighting for a long period of time. The Plum Street footpath, moving towards tying up. I don't know whether we've tied it up yet, but there was a little bit of footpath that still needed doing, but I've had very positive comments with regard to the Plum Street footpath and improved accessibility, particularly for children going to the school. Bike racks, possibly a question to the director. I noticed that the 2 have been installed with the report. Is there the possibility to look at Centrepoint and installing 1 or 2, and I'm not quite sure how many bikes these racks hold, but I think there's some very old bike racks there, but actually as part of looking potentially as part of the Centrepoint project, as whether bike racks could be installed there. I'm not quite sure which director might be able to answer that.
Gentlemen, take your pick.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Bike racks can quite easily be done. It just comes down to a budget allocation.
Councillor Newstead, you want to jump in and make a comment?
Yeah, I think what Councillor Reynolds is talking about is the 2 new bikes, the red ones, isn't it? They're not bike racks.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, the red ones are actually just an identifying symbol. The racks are the stainless steel hoops, and there's 2 of them at each of those locations.
Normally see a bike rack. The front wheel goes in.
Very good. Okay, how are we going, Councillor Reynolds?
One more question to possibly the director with regard to wastewater, and to take off my hat to the staff and particularly to the manager, Charlie Harris, for getting that project up. And you know, the recycle plant at the back end. Is there any update on what sort of time frame till we may be actually able to produce water out the other end? And we don't need it at the moment with the rainfall, but that plant will be fully operational.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. Look, the contractor was supposed to be on site this week, but unfortunately, because they're coming from Sydney, they can't. I will defer to the manager of water and wastewater with regards to what his an expected timeline from a perspective of number of months may be. Had we been able to do that?
For spring and summer. Thank you. Councillor Reynolds.
And just a final, I'd like to thank Charlie Harris for all the work, given that Mr. Harris has noted that he's moving on with council over the last number of years since he has been with Blayney Council. So just like that noted to thank him for all that work. Thank you.
Noted. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to the infrastructures, the Director of Infrastructure's report? No other questions or comments. I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, now move through to item 15, page 119, wind farm easement deed. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Somerville has moved that way. Do I have a seconder? Thank you. Councillor Newstead has seconded that. Questions, comments, councillors, regards to this item? Councillor Somerville.
You, Mr. Mayor, just a couple of questions or queries. I see that we originally were looking for a lease agreement in respect of this location of this infrastructure, in a similar way that we have with Cadia for the slurry pipeline, but it's now being proposed as an easement. You know, on the face of it, a lease would have been better from council's point of view than an easement, but I take it our lawyers are happy with that. That's the first question. And I'll get to the second question. You can deal with them at once. And the other question along similar lines is, financially, is it the same? In other words, is the bill we would have got from a lease the same as the fee we're going to get for having the easement? And it's not very easy to work out exactly what the budget implications are when it's quoted in a rate in cents per square meters, when we don't know what that translates into.
You, Mr. Mayor, our original intention was to pursue a similar arrangement to that we have with the concentrate pipelines, and we did engage the same legal advice for this matter. The proponent wasn't supportive of that. They'd obviously progressed down a path to some point where they didn't want to back away from that. There was a significant amount of questioning, and this did take some time to resolve, satisfying our minds, going the way that we have, and have reached some satisfaction with that. They had some challenges initially because one of the easements, but it's really going to be one easement. The easement that carries the lower transmission line was going to be, and is going to be, solely owned by the proponent. But the other one, which is what connects from the proposed substation to the existing Cadia to North Orange transmission lines up in the Cabon Shire, was going to, there was some backwards and forwards toing and froing with regards to who was going to own that. And they are now at the point where 99.9% sure that they are going to own it, the proponent or the developer, as opposed to it being owned by the likes of a network service provider like Transgrid. And when a network service provider owns it, there's no need for an easement, there is when it comes to a higher voltage like that line. The lower voltage one wouldn't have required an easement and so forth. So there was all these backwards and forwards, us understanding what they were proposing and so forth. And we've worked with them for some period of time now to get to this outcome. Our legal representatives are happy with it, and we're satisfied with it. With regards to the valuation, that was undertaken by the same valuer that undertook concentrate pipeline valuation. They've used a different methodology, and the easement will not run continually along our road reserve. It will go backwards and forwards between our road reserve and private lands. For instance, from the Cadia Road, Panua Road intersection up through the pine forest along Cadia Road, a significant amount of that easement is actually within the pine forest. So they actually have to reach an agreement with Forestry Corporation as well. The valuation, we did talk about it as to whether we should actually seek a different valuation as well. But at the end of the day, with the amount of land that's going to be within an easement on our road reserve, it was quite negligible. And look, in totality, I can't remember the total figure, but in the ballpark, it was about valued at about $3,000 a year. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Director. Thank you, Councillor Somerville. Councillors, any other questions or comments regards to this item? We have a mover, we have a seconder. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Move now through to page 122, item 16, proposed road closure, 184 Barry Road. Recommendations there 1 and 2. Do I have a mover? Thank you. Councillor Kingham has moved that way. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Reynolds to second that. Questions, comments, councillors, regards to this item? Looks pretty straightforward. If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, page 125, item 17, the Central West JO supply and deliver of bitumen emulsion. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you. Councillor Newstead has moved that way. Councillor Ewan has seconded. Questions or comments, councillors, regards to this item? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Councillors, now move through to page 128, item 18, minutes of the Traffic Committee meeting held 11th of June. Recommendations there 1 to 6. Quite a lot involved. 1 to 6 recommendations. Do I have a mover? Councillor Reynolds has moved this item. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Somerville, thank you, has seconded that. Questions or comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A lot of events proposed, so we'll have to watch this space and whether they go ahead with the current COVID restrictions. So some of these may not take place. One highlight of an event that we hope will take place, but we'll wait and see, is the Millthorpe Winter Fire Festival. I haven't heard that it's been postponed or called off at this stage. That's in early August. Also, the charity tractor trek, Central West Charity Tractor Trek, is going to base itself out of Blayney, out of the showground for 3 days, and travel around, traverse mostly our local government area, but also a little bit of Cabon, I think, is the only other LGA that they're going into. So nice that, again, we can help a local charity in traversing our roads for a good cause for, I think it's Little Wings or Red Wings, one of the wings, Little Wings. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And also there was a move to put a stop sign on the corner of Henry Street, Farm Lane and Church Street in Blayney. Again, that has been recommended that it stay the same, but line marking be improved. And as a note of one of the other recommendations to come out of a previous traffic committee was with regard to Transport for New South Wales, an investigation of North Adelaide Street and potentially opening that up. There is some potential talk that there may be some black spot funding as in the actions in the report later on. So we'll wait and see whether there might be some state government funding to help open up that intersection and maybe enhance that intersection. Also, many councillors and the community may be interested with regard to the steering committee being developed for the road safety strategic plan for the Shire. So the traffic committee will have overlook that strategic plan, which will then eventually come back to council. And finally, there has been a lot of talk about Blake Street in Millthorpe and concerns about erosion and other actions. So some information has been sent off to local residents there surrounding that and asking for feedback about the future of part of Blake Street, not all of Blake Street, just 1 or 2 sections of Blake Street. So they're the major issues discussed during the last traffic committee meeting, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillors, any other questions or comments in regards to the minutes of the traffic committee? If not, I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, council, now move through to page 133, item 19, report of the Central New South Wales Joint Organisation meeting held 3rd of June 21. Recommendation there. Do I have a mover for this recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Reynolds, I believe, first, and then Councillor Somerville. Is that correct? Thank you. Councillor Somerville has seconded that. Any questions, comments? Councillor Reynolds.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just one question maybe through you or to you with regard to the ongoing losses with the organisation. But a note there that this is the last year that they're going to potentially run at a loss of approximately $35,000. If they do turn to try and create a profit, are they looking at trying to gain more revenue as the JAO, or looking at potentially cutting some services or some part of the JAO to get back into the black?
Thank you, Councillor Reynolds. So now we've had the first pretty much 12 months of the JAO. Now, it has certainly been a difficult time for JAOs right across New South Wales, but fortunately our JAO has performed very well. But the board has decided that they'll undertake a strategic review of the last 12 months, and part of that will be looking at what potential future income streams will be identified. So that review will be done by all the mayors and general managers, and it'll inform, reflect on not only what we've achieved the last 12 months, but how it could improve things into the future. Councillors, any other questions or comments? If not, I will put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. Okay, councillors, we do have some matters to be dealt with in closed committee. So in accordance with the Local Government Act 93 and the Local Government General Regulation 2005, in the opinion of the General Manager, the following business is of a kind as referred to in section 10.2 of the Act and should be dealt with in part of the meeting closed to the media and public. Item 20, tender for supply or supply and delivery of quarry materials. Item 21, tender for Gallimont Road Bridge over Gully Swamp. Item 22, tender for the construction of King George Oval change rooms. Can I have a mover that we go into closed committee? Councillor Kingham has moved that way. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Somerville has seconded that. I'll put the motion. All in favour?
Aye.
Against? Declared carried. We now go into closed committee. Thank you, councillors.